Hello, everybody who is attending this event. First of all, let me say a warm welcome to all our participants. I will use the alphabetical order. Ludmila Nofit from the Republic of Moldova. I will present her a little bit later. Luisa Slavkova from Bulgaria, and Zsuzsanna Szelényi from Hungary. I'm very happy you accepted our invitation. Let me say that this event is hosted by Black Sea Trust of the German Marshall Fund of the US, fundamentally by True Story Project, which is a project of Black Sea Trust, and by Eastern and Southeastern Europe Network, SNSPA, which is an initiative started this year meant to support the promotion of women who study and who are specialist experts in international relations. Now, this title was negotiated with Alina Inae, who is the director of the Black Sea Trust in Romania, and she comes up usually with interesting titles and creative ones. Is Illiberalism the New Pandemic? So what I intended to do is to talk about illiberalism in this area, in our region, and to actually explore what is specific for each of our countries and what is common, and whether there is anything that we can do to maybe counter this trend. So let me just say a few words about each of you, present you shortly, and then we are going to have this dialogue. So I will start in reverse order. So Zsuzsanna Szelényi, she is a Hungarian psychologist and politician, and she was a member of the Hungarian parliament twice. The recent one mandate was between 2014 and 2018. And she also earned a degree in psychology and international studies. And she studied at Tufts University, Massachusetts, and Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Luisa Slavkova is a founding member and director of Sofia Platform, a democracy development organization based in Bulgaria. She was visiting fellow at the Human Rights Institute in Columbia, New York City, and programs manager of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Luisa served as an advisor to the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nikolai Mladenov. So welcome both of you, Zsuzsanna and Luisa. Let me say a few words about Ludmila Nofit, who is already a member of the Eastern and Southeastern European Network SNSPA. Ludmila started her activity in 2018 with the Foreign Policy Association of Moldova as a program coordinator. Since July 2019, she took the position of interim executive of this Association of Foreign Policy. She holds a BA and MA degree in International Relations at the Moldova State University and respectively Academy of Public Administration. Previously, she worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova. So welcome back, Ludmila. Now, thinking about the pandemic and thinking about illiberalism and comparing them, my first question to all three of you is there a virus behind illiberalism, like in the pandemic? And if yes, what is this virus? And I was thinking of baptizing this virus, if there is one, instead of COVID, Cov-ill, which is very suggestive in a sense. So please, who would like to start with an answer to this question?
you don't mind. Can you hear me? No.
Please, Zsuzsanna, yes.
Yes, you can hear me. Okay. So I think that's a very interesting term because obviously there is a relationship between the pandemic and the big consequences of the pandemic and what we call illiberalism, which is a U-turn from liberal democracy that our region turned to after the regime change 30 years ago, which was a continuous effort to build a stable democracy with its institutional systems, which was, according to my understanding, also a civilization project for the whole region, because obviously liberal democracy is a more fair and prosperous regime system than what we had before, which was the socialist communist period. So what we see, and obviously I have a very strong experience of this U-turn in Hungary in the last 10 years, when regimes, leaders, when they get a certain extra power, which is the case in Viktor Orban. He got a supermajority in 2010, and he basically used this extraordinary power to change the nature of the system in order to stay on power as long as possible. And I would say this is an autocratization process. This is a never-ending process which started 10 years ago, and it's an ongoing process, changing institutions, changing social structures through corruption, building new elites, changing the educational curricula in a way that a strongman-led system would be acceptable by the society again. So now this trend, this tendency, we see in many other countries in the world, in the Western world, in the last 10 years. And what makes the pandemic special and specifically worrying is that two things. One is that it's a very unstable environment when no one exactly knows what to do, how to move on. It's difficult to plan. So our future is in question in various different ways, and it's an experience of every single person. The other issue is that governments in a crisis situation get extraordinary power in order to manage the crisis. We authorize them constitutionally to make things which usually they do not have right. For example, control people's moves, control what can be published in the media, what considered to be a legitimate news and what is fake news. But so there's basically and of course they can use the army, they can militarize the healthcare system. So they can do a lot of things without control, which in a liberal society they cannot do, and which are under strong scrutiny. So this is a very dangerous moment. And of course, it's very much up to the regime's leaders, basically political leaders of our day, how they use this open authorized power. And this is what I think the pandemic and illiberalism and it's the same exist in the same moment makes the situation dangerous.
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. So it looks to me like your answer would be this authoritarianism, or this way towards an authoritarian regime might be a virus behind it, which is even more or gets more power by the pandemic. I don't know whether this is what I
Yes.
understood well.
Basically, there is no political leader who would not always want a bit more power than what they have. It comes from the logic of power. And this is what liberal democracy controls. So no one can have more power than others. There is no state institution in a well-working liberal democratic system which have unlimited power. And what we have now, we have unlimited power given to politicians, and that's the issue. How do we express any kind of control over them?
Mm-hmm. So, Louisa, what is your take of this COVID in Bulgaria? How does it manifest?
So I'm so tempted to start talking about different things than the question you pointed to. So I'll try to focus on that, but taking the liberty to take it in different directions with your other questions. Well, obviously, I think in a country where people do not have the habit of controlling government too much, I don't think that there are too many citizens in Bulgaria who actually take it to the website of the National Assembly or of the government to actually see how, for example, money related to the pandemic is spent. I think there isn't really much of civic control when it comes to knowing how exactly the government is dealing with that. I think everyone has heard at least that in the past, what is now more than 3 months, there have been protests in Bulgaria, and I think the general framework is that they are anti-corruption protests, but I think this is oversimplified. Obviously, there is a government here that has been in power for more than 10 years, so people are wary of the same party being in power. But not only, of course. There is this entanglement in the country between the judiciary specifically and whoever is in power. So there is a sort of even a triangle between business interests, judiciary, and those that are in power, which is, I think, partially a remnant of communism. So the lack of reform in the judiciary and the fact that there is almost something like a fourth power, which is the general prosecutor in the country, is something that has been out there for more than 30 years now and has been also systematically criticized both by European institutions, but also by the Venice Commission. So this is something that is out there, but I think because of this window of opportunity around COVID and the fact that so many young people came back to Bulgaria, and this coincided with the protests, there was a wave of awareness about how important actually rule of law issues are. Because rule of law is is not a sexy topic to talk about. It's not a topic based on which you win elections. We have seen this in the past. There are certain politicians or people from civil society who talk about rule of law, but this is nothing you get people excited about. But I think it was just this coincidence of events that made the topic sort of appealing to people and to protesters. So I think Zsuzsa was right to sort of look a little bit more historically into this question, because I think the sort of the illiberal pandemic has been sort of showing its roots already in the late 2000s. When you look into articles published in different media, you already there see first, sort of op-eds talking about populism and nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe. But at that time, no one really paid attention to this, because I think the sort of relative prosperity, but also peace, makes people extremely lazy Democrats. The lack of crises makes us sort of, a little bit laid back. Not, of course, the entire Europe, because Europe includes also Moldova, but it also includes the Western Balkans. It includes Ukraine and so on and so forth. But the rest of us, I think, in these first 2 decades since '89, we became a little bit lazy, and to sort of look into the healthcare vocabulary again, we lack a preemptive system. So why do we look into a preemptive system when it comes to healthcare, but we actually never thought of having a preemptive system when it comes to the civic mindedness? Because institutions and parties and so on and so forth, it's really it's not enough. People have to have a civic health that is actually preparing them to counter such illiberal tendencies.
This is an interesting concept, preemptive health, and even more interesting, preemptive civil society reaction or preparedness to anything that can go wrong. We know that in the Republic of Moldova, it's not a member of the European Union, but it's very close. We are neighbors. And you had recently presidential elections, which for many of us came as a surprise to have Maia Sandu elected as opposed to Igor Dodon. But this is just the top of what is happening in the Moldovan politics. So I'm looking forward to your reaction to this question, Ludmila.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liliana. First of all, I would like to say hello to everyone who joined to us. I think the topic comes in time in these difficult times. But first of all, I'd like to say that I think the pandemic outbreak, in fact, created and shaped the perfect environment for strengthening those anti-democratic and illiberalist tendencies in the region and beyond. So it's not something new. We just didn't pay too much attention because we enjoyed our liberties and our rights. But once the pandemic take more space, and the government make some restrictions, then we found in a position that we can do so much in this regard. So the struggle was if the government, under the pretext fighting the pandemic, can make or impose so many restrictions on human rights and civil liberties, because on the other side there are political forces or even individuals close to political government exploiting this opportunity from the pandemic in order to promote their narrow interests. So nothing in beneficial of the citizens. So I think this is a direct struck to the citizens, to democracy, to rule of law, and core principles of how a democratic developed state have to be. The Republic of Moldova, as you mentioned, is passing a new period of time, but also, as you mentioned, that's just like a top of the problem because we're fighting the severe consequences of pandemic, starting with social and economic one, but also a recent one, a very deep political crisis. So because of socialist parties together with other parties like shore parties and ex-democrat parties, we found itself in a situation when we have to choose what is better for us. Because the recent developments on political landscape in Moldova proved once more time that all these political movements which take place, it's totally anti-democratic and can be considered illiberalist. And here I'm talking about a series of laws which have been adopted in a very non-transparent way, breaking all legislative procedures without consulting public opinion or putting under the debate. So basically all these laws have been adopted in the midnight, yes. So I think in Moldova it's a kind of combination between illiberalism and oligarchic elements, because we can see that some individuals is still present in Moldovan landscape through their intermediaries, I mean through the members of the parliaments who are promoting their interests, trying to make some favors for these persons in order to come back on the Moldovan landscape. However, we also confronted some restrictions during the quarantine, which also made us to to think if those government measures can be justified, like to forbid a series of online portals. Allegedly, they are spreading fake news about coronavirus and everything related to pandemic. But my question is, to which extent that can be an efficient and long-term measure in order to fight propaganda and fake news, or it's just a short and ineffective measure? Because we know that people have to have this critical thinking and media education. But also, it's very important to mention that the civil society organizations and independent media outlets played a very important role during this time. They played a watchdogging role, because you already know about all these political movements, malign political movements, I can say, played by some individuals and political parties, and their interactions, it's proper and it's in time. And even before the event took place recently, yes, my colleagues from National Platform, which it's a platform involving different civil society organizations, come with a press conference to condemn all these actions and to make a request for these parties to back to the normal democratic principles and to avoid any breaking of democratic values and also democratic norms, because they're infringing all laws in Moldova. So basically, we're confronting a COVID, yes, and a COVID pandemic. But I'm afraid that if the society won't be unit, and the political position, if all not use all its tools in order to prevent this collapse, Moldova is going to in a very backslide of, I think it's total collapse of the rule of law in Moldova.
What you are saying, Luda, is a bit frightening, to be honest. I know that civil society in Moldova was and is very active, and actually played an important role in the last 10, 12 years, at least, to say the least. Including the present president is actually a political figure that came out of an upheaval, a civil society upheaval, basically. So what you all emphasized is more the fact that the pandemic made worse this trend towards illiberalism and authoritarianism even. So of course this is not valid in all countries. In Hungary it looks like Mr. Orban is already there in the autocratic area. But so you all emphasize this this shift and this the bad role, the evil role of the pandemic on this illiberal trend. I wonder whether you see any opportunities that this pandemic brought to this illiberal trend. So I don't know, maybe you want to, I don't know, Louisa, maybe you would like to start, because you said you had some idea.
I absolutely do see an opportunity, and I'm going back to the story with the protests in Bulgaria. I think not only here but also in other countries, partially the reason why one saw protests was because people spent too much time at home during the first lockdown. So there was literally the physical energy of people to go out. I mean, leave aside even the fact that there are enough reasons. But I think the second thing is that citizens, that the level of exposing the qualities of a government are much different than in usual times, because governments get ultimately judged by the ways they manage crises for people, because these are very tangible things. If topics like rule of law are not interesting for people, then you pretty pretty well feel it literally if a government cannot manage a healthcare system. And we've seen the breakdown of healthcare system in a lot of countries in the region. We have seen pictures of people dying on the staircases of hospitals. So I think the one thing that the pandemic did was to absolutely expose the way a government is capable of managing a crisis, but also of being able to look and think forward. The fact that the European Commission, has drafted this huge plan of support for countries to deal with the aftermath of the pandemic, and the fact that some governments haven't really had sort of the imagination to propose those policies or projects that would actually help their citizens to cope with the aftermath of the pandemic, has exposed how good governments are actually in managing the crisis. And this is why you also see you could always compare the way I don't know, for example, Germans have ranked trust in their government vis-a-vis how trust in current governments has been swinging back and forth in our countries.
Thank you, Louisa. Zsuzsa, would you like to step in?
Yes. I think Louisa touched very well that one of the core issue in this pandemic is obviously the healthcare system. So the healthcare system is a tricky issue in every country. It's very difficult to make a good quality healthcare system which provides equal access to each citizen and provide the quality service of the 21st century. I mean, healthcare is also very expensive. We all learn a lot about that in these days. So the healthcare management is really the kind of weakness probably of every government, because it's so complicated, and this is a very neglected area. Few governments cope well with the continuous healthcare reform in order that it serves all its citizens properly. So now the healthcare is completely in the light. We all follow day by day how the healthcare system copes or not very well coping with the pandemic issue, and the fact how tricky this is. There it shows that how governments treat the information about the pandemic. I don't know whether in your country is an issue, but it definitely is in Hungary. We have a data provision on everyday level, but this is really limited. Journalists put together the data sets from various sources in order to get a bit more than what the government is sharing. And for example, we have very little information of the situation of the hospitals, because each and every doctor and nurses had to sign a paper already in the spring that they are not speaking out. So this is unbelievable. Basically, these healthcare issues are dealt as secrecy, and watchdog organizations and investigative journalists are getting information from various informal sources in order that we know a little bit more of the truth. But so this is all the rule of law and the use of power during pandemic, and what's the role of a government when we speak about crisis management is really interesting. And we all learn these things now because we haven't been in such a situation probably none of us in our generation, because it's a kind of warlike situation. And still, in democratic environment, governments cannot simply do what they want under the surface of crisis management. So we do have the right to know what is happening in the hospitals, what is happening with those who are sick but are not in hospital, how much money is spent for the treatment, how much money is spent for anything, modernization, digitalization, within the healthcare system. And of course, the other big issue is the economic management, which is the other side of the coin in these days. And it's super difficult, even for the best government, to balance between the health of the people and the health of the economy. We also know that there are incredible new resources are coming. The European Union is providing a lot of resources. Governments are freely taking loans. The indebtedness of governments is now basically possible. It's limitless money is flowing into economic survival of certain sectors. But these are very, very important questions. How it's all public money, obviously, because that is always a public money. So we do have the rights to know everything about how much money, where the government is getting money from, what's the cost of these loans. For example, Orban took loan from the market in order to negotiate with the European Union recovery fund. As you probably know, he was threatening with vetoing the recovery package of the European Union, and he took a loan from the market for a very high rate in order to demonstrate for the European Union, and he doesn't need this money, which is obviously not true. And this is all on our coast. So the issue is that we do have rights to know everything, even if government manage crisis. And the question is how we do it. And I think there's a lot of local and community initiative helping in the crisis. We witness this all over the world, how people support each other. So there's a lot of civic movement, naturally organized way of people helping each other. Whether we can see this also in checking the governments as citizens, that's the interesting issue. And I think there is a lot of interesting things. I mean, definitely in Hungary, I mean, we are, as Louisa mentioned earlier, this kind of preemptive, democratic preemptive environment. We did have to develop this in the last couple of years because we had to seek for truth for several years now. So we do have the organizations, we do have the journalists. So there is quite a good mapping of what is happening, but still we don't see masses of people in the streets. But as you said, that whenever the pandemic is a bit moving back, and people will be free to move again, I cannot, I think we can expect a lot of people in the streets, because of course the frustration level in various reasons, it's very high, just basically because we had to stay home, to the fact that we are just not we don't have the access to the basic information that we need in order that we design our life in a proper way.
So I understand that you're kind of forecasting heavy upheavals, civil society upheavals after the pandemic, sort of, or it's very possible, very likely that this could happen. But what I gather is from what both of you said, Luisa and Zsuzsa, is that actually this pandemic gave the opportunity to the people to look closer to what the governments are doing and see that they are not really transparent. And actually the pandemic brought up situations in which the governments generally were less transparent. This is happening also in Romania. We had this, many people are unhappy that we don't know exactly how, or we know that there are less people tested these days. So then we don't know exactly, we cannot compare, it's difficult to compare the number of people who get ill and so on and so forth. So transparency issues are everywhere. What I can say about the Romanian case is that I feel that women get less and less rights. And I have to say, and I was telling you before the program, that we are really surprised that the new government actually does not contain any woman. It's like more than half of the population of this country is not represented. And there were attempts to ban gender studies from universities. Thanks God that the Constitutional Court gave the rule last week to say that it's unconstitutional, the modification of the law of education. So yes, there are issues. So at least I feel that Romania is backsliding into a sort of society, more conservative society when it comes to gender equality. And the critics, they are always scaring people using the example of transgender people, and without the citizens knowing what this transgender issue is. So they are using something less known by the general public in order to scare the people about a gender issue. So it's a kind of a foggy area here. Let me go back to Luda and ask her whether there is any opportunity that she sees that this pandemic brought in the Republic of Moldova.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, I totally agree with you, Luisa and Zsuzsa, that healthcare system has been the most affected, but it's very important that the government, or in our case, the future government, to improve this healthcare system, because at the regional level, the situation is much more worse, even in big cities, in the capital. And also another point which I'd like to mention is about the education system. I think this is another sector which needs improvement, and the pandemic show or proved that we need a lot to do, because when we we switch easy to offline to online way of life, but for the many of pupils and families, access to internet or international information technologies, unfortunately, was not possible, even though there were very many statements on behalf of authorities that this is the most suitable way, but they took into consideration that we have social vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities, which also need to be ensured of to respect their rights to access information, to education, and to other health and public services. But also, I think this pandemic proved once again that we have a big issue concerning the domestic violation, unfortunately. And here it's a matter of question of respecting human rights, and especially respecting the female and children's rights, because during the pandemic, experts noticed a high level of domestic violation, because victims basically didn't have any way to escape, and they was put in the situation to live in the same house with the aggressor. And there was many campaigns and international foreign assistance in order to provide them with shelter, also with information and other necessary things. Again, I think another sector which was mentioned, or another issue, it's about the information security. During the pandemic, we witnessed that we are so vulnerable when it comes to information, especially online information, because it's not so easy to track all these online portals, which are non-transparent, and we don't know who stays behind these portals. And like now, almost everybody have a smartphone or a computer and can easily access any information and create more chaos. Yeah, and people catch in this situation, and that's why we find the situation on Moldovan people didn't trust that this pandemic virus exists, because the communication and the narratives were so different even from authorities. The incumbent president previously made a different statement that this virus kind like simple flu and it's passing away, but the numbers of infected confirmed cases of COVID and the number of deaths, including among the medical staff, says the contradiction, yes, the opposite of this information. So I think information security and communication between authorities and mass media, independent mass media, is very important. We need to have this media literacy and critical thinking, because in the end, we don't know how to explain why people vote. How do they vote for one or another political forces or for one or another candidate? So I think the total responsibility is also on those who are in charge of. Yes, pandemic, it's worse, but also gives us a lot of opportunities, but it also depends who is in charge of the government and what are their intentions. But I'd like to stress that civil society, simple citizens, independent media also have their voice in this time. And I think during the pandemic, we prove that we can make a change. And this is very important in these tough times.
Thank you, Luda. Zsuzsa would like to.
Yeah, I'd like to continue this issue on women, because I think if there is a room for something stronger and new, then there is a room around the women. There are a million reasons how women are affected by the pandemic, and Ludmila mentioned already the gender-based, family-based violence, domestic violence, which we learned from the first days of the lockdowns in every country. So this is very obviously came out as an information. However, we have very little tools to do much about that to help each other. But the pandemic put women on a spotlight in various other ways as well. First of all, it's women who are managing the crisis in the healthcare system. So in the schools, so all the where the healthcare in the public life demonstrates its difficulties, all women are in the front line. So obviously in the healthcare system, obviously in the school system, which is also facing a lot of difficulty these days. In the public service, the public institutions are all served by masses of women. They are the ones who are in the front line. They are in the pharmacies, in the shops. So in the service system, it's many more women are working in the front line than men. So they know they take an extra burden. It's interesting that on the other hand, many more women lost their job than men, and this is because the tourism business, the hotels, another sector of the service industry also supported by more women than men. In the hotel business, many more women are working than men, and they lost their job. So we know data that like 3-4 times more women lost their job than men. I am actually quite concerned that after the crisis, this will be changed, because we know from 2008 crisis that women can also get easier job after a crisis situation. But at this very moment, when we are deeply in the crisis, more women lost their job. As you said, more women stuck at home. Obviously, when kids are at home, this is also more women who are taking care of them. So the double share that we usually register when we have family, this is also more active in this way. So I think this is a room for action. So when, especially as you said, and you say that the new Romanian government might have only men or just overall majority of men, because we know that one woman doesn't make a difference. And obviously the illiberal system, we know after 10 years that this is a deeply anti-women movement. It's a very traditionalist movement because it's the authoritarianism as such is more traditionalist. So there is a close relationship between how politics is changing in these days and what's the reality in this society and what's the role of the different gender, the women and men in taking the difficulties. I don't say that men are not sharing the burden. I just say that women are more on the front line. And this can be an opportunity to a new women movement, which actually in our countries were never really strong enough. In most of the Eastern European countries, we didn't go through all this organic women awareness transformation that Western societies went through. We don't have to go into details now why this was, because the socialist regime provided a lot of things for women, which centrally and partly ideologically, partly by needs. Basically, this organic women organization to mass movement exists only very few countries in our Eastern societies. And I think that there is a moment now to do something with this. And this might be a new, a new way of civic activity, because women might not be able to do it now during the pandemic because they are in the front line. But I think the learning process and the frustration and whether they are recognized and whether their real job and undertaking is recognized by the powers, by the political elite, will be a question at a certain moment. And I think there's a room to act together.
Thank you very much, Zsuzsa. This has been a very interesting intervention in terms of focused on women, and this gave me the idea of maybe we can have another Zoom in maybe January or February focused on women. And when you were saying about the autocrats and the things, I was just something came to my mind. I don't remember in the recent history, meaning recent history, let's say 20th century history, of a woman autocrat or dictator. Just please contradict me. I'm just curious. I was thinking, all the generals in Greece, the other generals in military in Argentina, all militaries in Dominican Republic. I don't remember. I don't recall. Maybe we should think about this. So,
Liliana, if without wanting to interrupt, if I could just make a comment here. I don't think we should take this conversation to an extreme. The fact that women haven't been autocrats might have to do with the fact that they haven't been in power. Because I think power is equally tempting for for the variety of genders.
You're right. No, I'm not taking. I'm just, I just came to my mind. This didn't happen. But then,
when we will see the first woman dictator, we would really see that now we are equal. I think.
Yes, and we should fight it. And we should fight it. We should fight back against that. Now, I have to say that when Zsuzsa was mentioning this, the fact that women are in the front line, you know, of this war with the coronavirus, I remember that I read a few days ago this report, United Nations report, saying that the pandemic, and this is the strong wording from UN, pandemic could wipe away 25 years of progress in gender equality. And the same report is saying that during the crisis, women did more domestic work. We know that, and it's kind of common sense. But even before the pandemics, the estimate is that women were doing 3/4 of the 16 billion hours of unpaid work that is done every day on the globe. So I think that, you know, we need to pay more attention to this aspect. And I think that generally women, not all, women have contradictory tendencies. Some women are more conservative, but some women are more revolutionaries. So maybe this pandemic is an opportunity for the revolutionary part of women in the region to react somehow, because to me it is outrageous what is happening these days in Romania. They were quarreling for 10 days, a week, 10 days, what party to take what places in the government. And when they ended up with the negotiation, even the few women who were there were gone. So I'm very much impacted by this. So let's step over this, and because we have very little time left, maybe make a round of interventions to say, you know, what is the way out of this illiberal trend? What do you see good in your country that has the potential to support a way out of it?
Maybe I
Luisa?
can start keeping it short, trying to be also conscious of time. So I'm increasingly thinking of this notion of the civic health and of this sort of, whether it's a preemptive civic system, but finding ways to not necessarily react upon crises as they come, but actually be prepared for that. Because whether it's conspiracy theory related to 5G or about the vaccines or whatnot, they'll keep coming. They were not invented yesterday and they'll keep coming. Same thing with the conversation around media literacy, as Ludmila was pointing. It all boils down to those civic competences that actually make you, give you the tools to pre-bunk things before they come. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how many campaigns now governments will make to support citizens to convince them to get a vaccine, if they don't have, the agency of taking the decision on their own, regardless of how many campaigns there are, there's still going to be too many citizens who would not want to take it. So I keep thinking of that, and also of the question of agency. So whose responsibility is actually to build this preemptive civic system? And I keep thinking here that it's been, I think, too long that we didn't onboard others except for parties and civil society in something like that. So tech companies, for example, bear a huge responsibility for the spread of all of that around the world. So I haven't seen too many activities coming from that sector to try to bring back humanity in all that conversation. So I think opening up the scope of who within civil society's responsibility it is to actually be part of the system, and how does it look like, who is invested in what. So opening up a little bit this conversation and trying to think of what do we do to have citizens that are civically healthy, and how does this preemptive system look like? So this is I think the opportunity that is always arising in a crisis, that you start asking yourself, how did we end up being here, and what is it that we can do so that if it hits us whenever, we're a little bit better prepared for that.
Okay, so your idea of a preemptive civic system shines bright. How can we prepare? Yes. How can we prepare? How can we prepare, and how to bring in, you know, businesses, as you say, and other agents which were less conspicuous in this crisis? Ludmila, would you like to step in?
Yeah, sure. In my personal opinion, I think this period gave us a chance to review our priorities, also to think about values and beliefs, if we would like to have a more bright future, but also to live to live in a country which is sustainable from different point of view. But also we have to take the chance to be more engaged in social and political decision-making processes. Do not step away and to expect when the authorities will make and will take the decision instead of us, because it also depends of our activism. And I think during the pandemic, as I mentioned before, civil society, and even there was local civic initiatives helping each other, helping those people who have been affected by the COVID. This showed us one more time that people can unite their forces and to help when this requires. And also I think we need to be more voice, yeah, because Moldova, as far as you know, we are not so proud like true protesters, you know. Just recent time we have been more engaged from civic point of view, and I'm very proud of that. Even now there are farmers who are protest against the current government because they lost their credibility. Even those from sector Horeca, yes, restaurants, hotels also joined to them, and I think this is a sign that we can unite our efforts in order to fight this pandemic and to make the recovery process not so difficult and not so even psychological, economical, social pressed, because everybody was touched because of this pandemic. And do not allow the liberal tendencies to take away our beliefs. I mean, from the path of the democratization according to those developed countries, which are an example for us. Liliana, I can hear you.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Sorry. So, Luda, I'm taking from you this idea of engagement, being engaged and keeping engaged, and also keeping up the beliefs that we have, and not let ourselves drained by the conservative trend.
Yeah.
Zsuzsa, please.
Yeah, we started this discussion with how during the pandemic malevolent political forces, or any political forces, try to use the opportunity for abusing power under the name of crisis management. And I think we got to a very, we made a nice tour during the discussion, because actually because the pandemic reaches all of us individually. So and this is so deeply related to human dignity, something that everyone can understand, unlike, you know, civil society, democracy, very abstract terms that we use among each other. But human dignity is something everyone knows what it is, because we feel it in our body when we are treated or not very well treated. It's about transparency. Are we taken seriously by our leaders? Are we shared the appropriate information, or do they want to really hide things from us? Are they there to serve the public good? I think this is the thing what we learn, and everyone learns whether we want or not. So this is I think a really interesting opportunity that after the pandemic, more democratic societies can also grow up. Maybe not led by the people on the power, because they might have different interests, or they behave with different interests, but because people all feel and understand what human dignity is and whether they are taken seriously, considering their human dignity. And I think as illiberal political forces oftentimes use propaganda to convince the public that they are the best ever political forces, reality and propaganda is contrasting in these days in many obvious ways. So this is also another learning process, what we can believe to the people on power. The trust that Louisa mentioned at the beginning of this discussion is in the core of crisis management and how we perceive our politicians to treat the crisis. And I think this trust or distrust is a kind of natural way to bring more people into those civic circles that will respond to the crisis and after the crisis period. So I see here a lot of opportunity for those who are organizing civic groups to step forward, to make it more explicit, to demonstrate their wills, their frustrations, their experience on the daily basis. And I think this can also be an opportunity, not only the people on power, but also for people for democratic development. So I actually see quite a lot of interesting opportunity. And well, hopefully when spring is coming, people will have to people will have the time to just sit down, to learn, to summarize, to try to figure out what they went through, and make conclusion and step forward.
Thank you, Zsuzsa. So I'm taking from you this idea of going back to what we have in common as human beings, like the human dignity. Actually, the fact that we are all affected by this pandemic reminds us that we are human beings with vulnerabilities. We are not all potent. We are just human beings with the weaknesses, and we have bodies, and we need to be catered for. And I also take this idea of the public good, to remind us that politicians are there for the public good, not for their own good, as opposed to the public. So I guess that this goes very well for all our societies. Yes, I like this, also the idea of trust, kind of recovering the trust in the leaders and the trust in each other. Let me end here our conversation, which I think it was a rich one, in which we learned many things one from another. And that I think this conversation was at least as rich as a manual. So this was a funnel. It was at least as rich as a manual. And I'm very happy that we did it. And I hope we will do it again on a topic that we will agree. And now I'm wishing you wonderful holidays, peaceful, with good health, and everything that you wish for you and your dear ones.
Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Have good holidays, and hope we get to meet in person next year.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to meet you and to see you, Liliana, and also wish you happy holidays. and keep believe that the better days are coming, and hope we'll see you in personal.
Definitely.
Thank you, and thank you also for the colleagues from the Black Sea Trust.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. True Story Project.
Okay,
Bye. Take
Bye.
care.